Yes, ma'am. Jared, banks are facing a record number of regulations. Small community banks are especially burdened by compliance costs. Bank capital requirements should also be appropriately calibrated so banks are not forced to park capital on the sidelines, limiting access to capital for Americans and small businesses. I was pleased to see that the Fed is looking to reform the supplementary leverage ratio. The SLR is supposed to act as a backstop to risk-based capital requirements, but too often the SLR acts as a binding requirement for U.S. banks. Would you agree that adjusting the SLR would free up capital for banks to invest more in treasury markets and other low-risk assets that would be beneficial to families and businesses across the country?
I would agree, yes.
Do you agree with so Vice Chair Supervision Bowman recently acknowledged that regulators tend to review individual elements of the capital framework in isolation without considering whether proposed changes are sensible in the aggregate and contribute to a capital framework in which all components work together effectively? Do you agree with her assessment, and how are you looking at the capital framework holistically to ensure that the Fed is not stifling economic growth?
Well, we're looking at basically the two big pieces now are Basel III and the leverage ratio. And I'm pretty confident we'll move on both of those in the relatively near future. And they fit together, as we discussed. The leverage ratio was always supposed to be a backstop rather than the binding. We want risk-based capital to be the binding capital requirement. So that's how those two pieces work together.
And as you look at I hope, a reintroduction of Basel III, if you're thinking about the bones of Basel III, obviously, over the last several years, we talked about this on Monday, we've heard the comment that the capital requirement was about right, although that capital requirement has been going up every year. And so as you look at Basel III coming back and hopefully being reintroduced and not just recalibrated, what do you forecast?
Well, we very much look forward to working with our colleagues at the OCC and the FDIC on Basel III Endgame, and I would agree we're gonna take a fresh start at that. The last proposal was actually well above Basel minimums. That's the thing. It was the ways in which it was gold plated, as we say, rather than the Basel requirements, which were very significantly exceeded.
Just giving us an opportunity to go back to the spending at the Fed for the construction, and you said that the items that were listed are not happening. I will say that the National Capital Planning Commission website, ncpc.gov, anyone can take a look at it for themselves, not just looking or listening to the New York Post, not just the Wall Street Journal, but page 129 of the final plans reflected rooftop garden terraces. The page 127 and 129 were where we found the ornate water features and final plans. The new elevators that dropped board members off at the VIP dining suite was page 37 of the final plans. The white marble was pages 40, 41, 65 of the final plans. I would welcome your staff coming in to walk my staff through what is happening there, as opposed to what we not have only read in the New York Post, not only in the Wall Street Journal, but also at the National Capital Planning Commission's website. So we would welcome that opportunity to have a...
Can I just quickly say, some of those are just flatly misleading. The
Sure.
idea of elevators, it's the same elevator. It's been there since the building was built. So that's a mischaracterization. And some of those are no longer in the plans. That's earlier. The plans have continued to evolve.
That was one of the questions I asked my staff before having the conversation with you in preparation, and assuming that your response would be to refute some of the things that were happening, was to ask the question, well, since the articles came out in April, have the plans changed since April as a result of the media attention to it, or was that just never in the plan? I would just say that having a clear understanding of what's going to be and when it changed would be helpful for us. I will note that having confidence in what we hear is incredibly important, and I would give you the opportunity to bring your team in or send your team over so that we can have that conversation. That would be helpful.
Look forward to doing that. And if you'll allow me to say one more sentence, none of those things are really were the cost drivers. You know, the real thing is what were the cost drivers that caused the spending to increase, and we have those too, but those are not the things that did that.
Well, I don't want
We
to
look forward to the conversation.
I don't want to eat into Bernie Moreno's time because he's kind of cranky when I do. I would just suggest that when I hear that things are completely and wholly inaccurate, and then I hear that they weren't quite the way they were, those are two very different framings of the conversation. And I only read page 129, 127 through 129, page 37, page 40, 41, page 65, page 129, because I could be wrong without any question, but I don't want to be misled. That's different.